In this video today, I want to talk about some of the things that Total War Warhammer 3 does right. I mean, just absolutely crushes. And at the end of the video, we're going to talk about some of the things that Warhammer 3 does wrong, or just mainly falls short on. Almost 7 years ago, to the day, Total War Warhammer 1 was announced in April of 2015, and the buzz was electric. And I ain't talking about that Pokemon. Finally, Warhammer fans could get a game that truly fit the bill of the massive scale of conflict in the Warhammer fantasy universe. Warhammer 3's launch in February of 2022 is the culmination of that journey, bringing us into the lands of Cathay, the Darklands, and of course, the twisted realms of chaos. As a bit of transparency, this isn't really a review. I'm not going to say what I'd rate this game or whatever. I'm just talking about the things that I personally love about the game from both a longtime Warhammer and Total War fan, and then of course sharing what I maybe don't love so much about the game. So we too shall now take a journey through Warhammer 3 and discuss a lot of the high points of the game. I understand that the game is in a funky state because of a number of issues with specific mechanics, which we'll go over at the end, but there is a lot of amazing things to talk about with Total War Warhammer 3. To open us up, I want to talk about the map. Warhammer 3 offers a wild variety of locations across its base Realm of Chaos campaign that I absolutely love. What makes this also unique is that these are lands that, when it comes to the game's lore, are not as completely fleshed out as, say, Ulthuan, the Old World, or Lustria. Cathay itself has been reimagined for this game, and it's amazing to sweep through the different portions, from the sprawling Great Bastion to the lush grasslands to the rock peaks of the southern and western mountains. It's a wildly diverse landscape. Even extending further into the mountains of Morn and Darklands, we get locations that have maps attached to certain army books, such as Tamarkhan, the Chaos Dwarfs, or Ogre Kingdoms, but to see it actually brought into the game is something people have been speculating about for years, myself included. Crossing the World's Edge Mountains and looking at Kislev, we get a stark contrast between the verdant fields of Cathay. Even further north, the Chaos Wastes unfurl as a snow-capped landscape that gets colored by the various forms of demonic corruption with each turn of your campaign. The seething red of Khorne, the writhing purple of Slaanesh, the twisted blue of Tzeentch, or the pustulant green of Nurgle will infest these lands. And all of this just works so well together. What might seem like an overly saturated color palette or even a cartoony feel is actually the fact that Warhammer 3 packs 5, or well, I guess 6 if you look at the old world, wildly different environs into its polar projection of the northern portion of the Warhammer world. In Game 1, we had the bleak and drab lands of the Old World, which, fit the tone. Warhammer 2 had the lushness of Ulthuan, the dourness of Naggaroth, the vermilion coast of Lustria, and the sand-choked sands of the Southlands. And for me, what Warhammer 3 really does right here is working all these environments into a seamless map. Even transitioning to the Chaos Realms, filled with the color range of their respective Chaos gods, feels like an awesome shift in tone. Another nice touch is the small lore factoids that exist on the map, or the ambient map pieces like Cathayan terracotta sentinels that look around, the growing Chaos corruption, the wispy snowflakes of Kislev. It's just a gorgeous map. And I really can't stress enough how much fun it is to see that chaos corruption spread through the campaign map, mainly because any battlefield you zone into for combat will share that corruption. So if the location you're at is heavily corrupted with Khorne, then the battle map will be filled with Khornate edifices, red warp gates, the sky will be tinged the color of blood. Further, that corruption is not binary. So if two corruptions are dominant, then it'll mesh together for a crazy mix of colors. I will say though that the choice of a polar projection map does make for a somewhat warped perception of the game world. What feels like the easternmost portion of the game's map is actually the southern end of Cathay on, well, like an actual map. And I imagine this will change once we get access to a large combined map or perhaps future DLC that will change the playable landscape, hopefully. Map aside, we also got a lot of diversity when it comes to the available factions for Warhammer 3. Cathay, Kislev, and the pre-order DLC of Ogre Kingdoms all have very different ways of playing, but then the fourth faction, Chaos Demons, has 4 more different playstyles attached to each of the Chaos Gods. Even further, the ability to play an undivided Chaos Demon faction unites all that diversity under one umbrella, and that is a lot of fun if you take certain units from a specific god. Starting with Cathay, we get a faction that is very regimental in its approach to army construction and uses, with a rather standard army construction cannon and solid front line of Jade Warriors, you will fill out your army with different auxiliary or specialist troops across the wide range of units you have available. Peasant archers, elite celestial dragon guard, thundering terracotta sentinels that smash into your opponent, longbow riders that swoop down upon your enemy, or a wide array of artillery pieces and flying machines that Cathay has access to. To drive the faction home, you also get their two primary characters that have the ability to morph into Dragon Ball Z Shenrons and grant you wishes that piss off your enemy. The animations of Zhao Ming alone are some of my favorite in the trilogy. Kislev also has a wildly different playstyle than Cathay, despite the fact that both factions are effectively human factions. Kislev's entire army, for the exception of a handful of units, are hybrid melee and ranged fighters. Depending on the unit, you have some that are better at a specific role, but this gives you so much firepower that you'll need as the hordes of demons come tearing down from the north or through rifts in your land. As the gunshots of the Streltsy and Kossars ring over the battlefield, there is also the lumbering and devastating charge of winged hussars mounted on bears, smashing apart your enemy as the polar bear from Golden Compass slaps things around asking for rent money. Speaking of demons, the Chaos Demons offer some of the most unique gameplay across the initial factions of the game. And this is mainly because of the siloed nature that each of the gods embodies in its units and tactics. Tzeentch units are ranged specialists, burning the foe down with eldritch flames while also commanding devastating spells that explode and cake the map in a blue inferno. Nurgle units are slow and cumbersome, but take a beating. With high health pools and regenerative abilities, the spells of Nurgle can also aid in healing your troops or degrading the enemies. Slaanesch's glass cannony approach requires probably the most attention to detail of the four factions, but when used properly, it is absolutely devastating. And then there's the brutal carnage of Khorne, whose sole purpose is just killing things. Go forward and take skulls for the Skull Throne. Lastly, the Ogre Kingdoms play different than every other faction in Warhammer simply because the bulk of the army are monstrous ogres. Smaller in overall army size, but larger in their ability to crush through enemies with devastating charges and hulking beasts of war that shoot, tear, or crush your opponent under hoof. This diversity offers up a lot of different ways to approach the campaign that makes each playthrough feel different in ways that Warhammer 2 just didn't really capture, since two of the four starting factions were basically mirrors of each other, Dark Elves being offensive and High Elves being defensive. My issues with replayability, which we'll talk about at the end of the video, are linked to the campaign itself, not the factions. We get so many different ways to approach the game across not just the units, but the campaign mechanics for each of these races that each playthrough feels fresh. And that's what I think Warhammer 3 does so much better than the other two games, making each campaign or each faction feel truly unique across research, units, campaign, and battle mechanics, all of it. Every time I sat down to play a new legendary lord, I had to spend a solid chunk of time looking at every new thing to grasp the different angle you approach the campaign with, which I feel adds a lot of longevity down the road, at least. To give a further example, what I really like about this variety of playstyle is that the campaign feels different. When you're playing as any of the base Warhammer 2 races, it's essentially adapting the most optimal playstyle of growth and income, rinse and repeat. In Warhammer 3, the different campaign mechanics force you to approach things differently. Nurgle's building tree is wild, so there's far less conventional approaches to it. Khorne's constant need to fight while also settling ruined locations. Cathay's harmony in both campaign and battle, forcing you to constantly play a balancing act. So you maybe play a tall Nurgle campaign where you go slower, or a faster Khorne campaign. It really sets the pace for how you tackle things versus, again, Warhammer 2, where you're doing the same thing across all four of the base races for the exception of their faction-specific mechanic, which feels tacked on or, just not as compulsory to play. On that note, though, let's move on to another subject I'm keen on. Warhammer 3 has improved upon so many base mechanics that the game just feels a lot easier to grasp, or at least understand. Looking purely at campaign mechanics, each faction now gets something like a minimum of, 5 different unique mechanics, from larger ones such as the Great Game with all the Chaos Gods, to smaller things like the Gifts of Slaanesh. There's just a lot you're bombarded with, but thankfully we get a slew of improvements to the UI as well as transparency into portions of the game that we just didn't have before. When we're looking at the battle map and the unit information cards, we can see what units are bracing, which is a huge benefit as bracing is an ability that will negate the charge bonus of an enemy if your unit has a charge defense. Seeing a unit's mass also gives us an idea of how well said unit will displace or be displaced during a charge. Things like currently active effects and passive active battle abilities listed out are just really nice ways to get a good idea of what's going on when you're swooping through the battlefield. All this information in the past was just kind of hidden away, and you eventually learned about it by reading an external source or watching a video that explains it. While there is still a lot to take in, it's at least more transparent to anyone new to the series. We talked about faction unique campaign goodies. Well, that applies to the battle map just as well. Every faction gets a gauge that will trigger abilities that you can use to help swing the battle in your favor, or special passive effects on their units that give them an edge. In some cases, they get both. So again, you get a richness that helps make every army fight differently on the map. To be fair, most every faction in the game prior to Game 3 has had this in some form, but it's generally been a passive or at least less active part of your battle process. Take the murderous or martial prowess for the elves. Those are passive abilities that will take care of themselves. The Demons of Chaos now have 3 tiers of active abilities that will charge based off of the patron god you're playing as. So cast more spells as Tzeentch and you'll get access to tiers 1, 2, and 3 of those special abilities. Moving back to the campaign map side of things, we get a much needed overhaul to the diplomacy system. Quick deals from Total War 3 Kingdoms and Troy have made their way into the Warhammer universe, finally, allowing us to speedily get bulk diplomatic actions done with. And one of the biggest improvements on this screen, though, is the new ally system, where you can build outposts in each other's lands, allowing defenders of the respective faction to be present in your garrison. Furthermore, recruiting units from said faction is also an awesome boon that will be incredible when the full map of the game is launched. Playing as Cathay, why not have massive Kroxigors supporting your army? How about playing as the High Elves and having Skaven fight with you? And that would finally make the Intrigue and Court ability useful for the faction. Get those rodents of unusual size to help you save Princess Buttercup. It's an awesome way to bleed factions together and make for some truly fun army compositions. And if you want to try abusing this system now, playing as Slaanesh allows you to get some Wild Empire or Wood Elf units in your army to join on your nipple-tickling blood orgies. Huge disclaimer here though. The actual allied system of assistance, war declarations, and what have you is still hugely flawed. So while you can do quests, pull armies to your aid, and designate war targets, the AI has the intellectual aptitude of a 4-year-old painting a picture with their left hand using blunted crayons. I have no doubt it'll be improved in time, but it is a shortcoming I wanted to address up front. Now, segueing here, I don't know about you, but I swallowed a marble as a kid. And that's not relevant to what we're talking about, but I figured it's a good way to jump into my next subject, because the ability to build your own lord in the Demon Prince is one of the most exciting features of Warhammer 3. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of Chaos Demons in the tabletop, but the Demon Prince has always been unique because you can decide how to build the demon based off of certain features you want the model to have. Total War brings that to life with a fully customizable monster in the Legion of Chaos faction that has been an absolute joy to play and experiment with. There are some mechanical issues with the Prince's stats right now, but from an aesthetic standpoint, you have so many options at your disposal. As you level up your Prince, you get access to more and more parts that allow you to cater to the specific playstyle you have in mind. Want to be a caster? Level up your Glory of Tzeentch. Want to be a hybrid caster melee character with lots of tankiness? Do Nurgle and Tzeentch. You get a lot of great combinations before you fully dedicate to one god, and the ultimate customization options will change your demon in ways the previous ones didn't, getting that, full-on Chaos God flavor. Even further is the fact that each of the pieces is attached to a color. So again, you're looking at the 4 main colors of the 4 gods, with black being associated with the Chaos Undivided. As you socket each piece onto your demon, it will color the demon accordingly. So if you have, say, 4 Khorne pieces and 2 Tzeentch pieces, you'll get this predominantly red-colored prince with a nice blue tinge to it. So not only do the pieces have art attached to them, but they will change the entire look at the demon. The most exciting thing about all this, though, is that it hypes me up for future possibilities. DLC expansions to this process with more body parts, including other races in this feature, or how the modding community will capitalize on this, making some incredible mods in ways I just couldn't even fucking possibly imagine. This is hands down one of my favorite features of Total War Warhammer 3. Moving away though from actual in-game mechanics and whatnot, the presentation for Warhammer 3 just blows my tits off. To be fair, this is something Warhammer 1 and 2 had already done so well. The audio for marching across the battlefield, thundering charges and spells ripping into your opponents has been a cornerstone of the Warhammer franchise, and they've dialed it even further for Game 3. The soundtrack for each faction in each location on the map is extremely fitting and really sets an immersive tone to that campaign. You get the Slavic chanting of Kislev over loud drums that pushes you ever onward in the defense of the Ice Queen's realm. The brazen horns and operatic choir of the Khorne battle music feels like an epic climax in one of the many endings of Return of the King. Even the Ogre kingdoms have amazing Mongolian throat singing that I never thought I needed in a Total War game. All this just sets up this great ambiance, making for battles that you can get lost in. This is especially keen when you play the campaign's pivotal survival battles that are like 30 to 45 minute long slogs. Having a strong music track and supporting audio makes it feel more engrossing and tense. Out of all these things, the cinematics for Warhammer 3 are just hands down the best of the trilogy. I love the faction-specific hand-drawn animations of Game 2 with the parallax effect that has become so popular with that medium, but Game 3 brings that same touch and makes it even better. Adding some incredible voice work such as Richard Armitage, who does an amazing job as Be'lakor, the first Demon Prince. Right from the prologue, you're steeped in this rich voice acting that transitions into each time you get a soul in the main campaign race. Not to spoil the content of the first cinematic after gaining your first soul, but for those that have seen it, it was a level of polish that I was really just kind of not expecting, and one that was frankly hyped me up for future expansions upon the cinematics come further content being added to the game. And nothing gets my rocks off more than Kislev Waifu or Cathayan Dragon Queen screaming at me with smoldering eyes. Katarine's opening cinematic is arousing and amazing all at the same breath. I think these cinematics, more than the previous games, really set the mood for the climate of the campaign you're about to take part in. You think about Tyrion or Teclis's intro, both being them quarreling in some random orrery, remarking how one will work on home issues while the other works abroad. Okay, so I think I hate my brother. For someone completely new to the lore, that doesn't give much context in my opinion, because the two actually were seldom, if ever, that violently angry with one another in the lore. And having the narrator as a constant across all the cinematics helps sort of create a thread of connection between all the campaigns to the specific motivations of that character. I feel like you have a better idea of what's going on and why you're doing it in Game 3 that I think is just so huge. Now, the last feature, or last good feature I want to get into is co-op play. Total War has always had co-op in some way, shape, or form. Some games have done it better than others, but across the Warhammer series, Game 3 just absolutely crushes this process. You have simultaneous co-op, which, when it works as far as internet connections go, is brilliant. You do all your turns at the same time. Any battles that need to be fought can be auto-resolved, or you can manually fight them while your friends take control of the AI. So you get so many layers built into just playing the base game on a co-op standpoint that I love. 4 friends want to play together? Sick, you can pull that off in Warhammer 3. This is such a needed improvement on the series, especially when you look at, Paradox titles, which have massive multiplayer campaigns where people can play in their own corner of the map if they want to. So this is something that Total War needed to do, and is something I expect now going forward to keep with the times. Another big improvement are the mini campaigns you have access to. The mini campaigns work on a smaller scale, with the lords getting buffed up tech and a set victory point win condition. You earn victory points every turn based off the amount of settlements you control, which makes for a much shorter campaign style, but also one that you can just jump into. You can jump through multiple campaigns in different configurations with your friends. This was a co-op approach to Warhammer that I didn't think I needed, nor one I expected to enjoy as much as I do. Sure, Warhammer 1 and 2 have co-op or versus campaign modes, but you're limited to 2 players. This time, it's expanded up to 8 players in a glorious way. After all, it's not about the Chaos Realms, it's about the friends we made along the way. Even if some of those use a fucking chariot to run over your perfectly healthy troll character multiple times, all the while cackling. Yeah, that's an inside joke for those that have been watching me for a long time, but for those that haven't, this game mode will ruin your fucking friendships, I promise. Alright, we've gone through a lot of the great things about Warhammer 3, and in my honest opinion, it's an awesome game with a ton of really kick-ass features going for it. The bad news is that there are also a good deal of issues with the game in its current iteration. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The game is rough right now beyond the first and second playthroughs. But to bookend this section with good news, they're all things that can be easily fixed in a patch or two, and they're not structural issues with the actual fabric of the game. We have already gotten insight into the next patch coming in early April, which should alleviate a lot of the big issues people are having, stabilizing the game for long-term fun in the sun. So let's dive in on some things that Warhammer 3 isn't doing right now. So I hinted at this just a bit ago, but the game's replayability is just not good right now. Sure, there are 12 combined legendary lords across all the factions currently available in the game, but all 12 of those lords, which are effectively campaigns, are marred with the same overarching campaign goal: the Realm of Chaos race for the souls for the 4 demon princes. Now, if you replay any other game, the game's story doesn't change, so an argument can be made about replayability not necessarily lending itself to a different outcome for the story. Take Elden Ring, which I can't stop playing like a crack whore right now. No matter what build I play, the story remains the same. But that's never really been the case with Total War. Total War has always been about replayability and trying things out at a different angle or different approach. We're talking 22 years of games that allow you to replay the campaign in any way you want without any kind of limiting factor attached to them. Even Game 2's campaign objective, which had the same Vortex campaign for all the base factions, could be largely ignored in pursuit of playing through each game however you saw fit. This unfortunately has led to a massive player hemorrhage, with something like a 75% drop in player base after the first month of launch because people are waiting for a combined Immortal Empires map, which should lead to alleviating this issue with infinite replayability. Piggybacking off of that last note, because we mentioned it with the Realm of Chaos race, the Chaos Realms are equal measures fun and annoying in the same scope. The Realm of Slaanesh is twisted and delightful in its many tantalizing temptations. The Realm of Khorne is just as you'd imagine it to be, with straightforward, endless combat. But the other 50% of the race, Tzeentch and Nurgle, are rough, real rough. You can stomach your way through Nurgle, no pun intended, but it is annoying. Tzeentch, though, is just a realm of frustration and madness. And to be fair, that fits the lore description of the realm, but this is something I want the game to get wrong about the lore. You blindly grope your way through a number of portals until you hopefully land on the right one that sends you to the platform you need to before you can do the final survival battle of the location. Now, this wouldn't be a huge issue if it wasn't for the AI. If the AI enters the realm of Tzeentch before or even after you're immediately on a timer. Some clever folks on the subreddit have taken a look at the code to find out that the AI will wander around the realm, going through random gates for 5 turns until they will magically take the right gate, no matter what, to the final platform. There, they'll wait a turn, then attack, and finish the survival battle, booting you out of the Chaos Realm with your ass in your hand and a lot of frustration. I mean, this is a hard kick in the nuts, especially if the aforementioned AI faction is at an equal point of the race as you are, because they'll pull ahead just by virtue of this 5-turn system. Which brings up another point. If the AI really gets ahead of you in the overall race, then there's only one chance to stop them before the final battle at the Forge of Souls. If you fail, then you lose. Now, that might seem like a condition of the campaign as a means of a challenge, but because the AI cheats their way through the Realm of Chaos, it makes matching their pace far more difficult, especially on the latter difficulties where you already have a slew of other campaign mechanics stacked against you. Lastly, the rifts are often a 10 or so turn slog through the realms where your primary lord is the only character that can take part in the adventure. This is fun from an experience and RP perspective, but in certain campaigns, especially in the beginning, you're looking at your sole army being locked away for something like 10 turns, leaving your lands relatively undefended as your most powerful army is going to be the one fighting for the Demon Prince souls. All this really makes the game a pain in the ass because you're being pulled away from conquering and growing your empire. If you're playing as Kosteltian or the Demon Prince, you're actually falling way behind the power curve too, allowing the already non-stop onslaught of enemy forces to become even stronger without you quelling them. In the previewed patch notes, CA has already released a number of ways that they will be changing this, and I'd love to do a post-mortem on this video after the patch, so let me know if you'd like that down in the comments section below. Now, As much as I've just talked about how the AI is a cheating bastard that won't pay child support, there are a lot of side issues with the AI that makes the game very clunky as well. Warhammer 2 went through so many patches and DLCs that by the time the game ended, the AI and a lot of supporting systems that the AI utilized were in a really solid spot. It seems that a lot of those later improvements did not make their way into Warhammer 3. My theory for why this happened is the same situation that happened in the transition from Warhammer 1 to Warhammer 2. The build of Warhammer 1 that the team was working on to make Warhammer 2 was a much earlier build than the final one before Game 2's launch. I suspect we're dealing with a very similar instance with Game 2 into Game 3, where the siloed nature of game development resulted in a Game 3 build that was several builds behind the latest conventions of Warhammer 2. So again, this is something that can easily be patched away in due time, but it's frustrating to have to deal with all over again. The AI's sloppy treatment of alliances is really one of the biggest culprits on this list, because the new allied system is just so fun and engaging, at least in theory. Once you're in a situation trying to rely on the AI actually coming to your aid or taking part in a war you're both involved in, you'll find that it rarely happens. When it does happen though, it's a thing of beauty, but it's something that I really would like to see overhauled going forward. This also extends to the AI's responsiveness on the battle map. With the introduction of the new minor settlement battles and larger siege maps, there has become a lot of different ways to navigate the battlefield. Overpasses, bridge, wall positions, kill boxes, there's just a lot more going on and the AI can't keep up with a lot of it. It's mainly relegated to pathfinding issues where the AI just sort of gets hung up on the smallest point of a corner or won't properly pile in when attacking a small-sized unit/single entity. All this culminates in a lot of frustration for the end user if they're not really on top of making every little movement for their army on the battlefield. I haven't had a ton of instances like this crop up, but when they do, it can lead to a prized unit getting wiped off the board just because the AI got clunky with its movements. This leads me to my last note before closing the video out. There are not a lot of combat-oriented bugs, but the ones that do exist are pretty egregious. Half the fun of Total War is taking a full stack of 20 units of horsemen and swarming your enemy in a massive horse-headed Zerg attack. I've done it since Rome 1, I'll do it here in Warhammer 3. But there seems to be some sort of issue with the way that charge bonuses work with the cavalry, resulting in a unit of horsemen charging into a weaker infantry unit and just getting completely ripped up, even if the unit is not even braced. And this has already had one pass with a minor patch, and we've been told that it's being looked at further, but it's a pretty huge issue right now. The same can be true for a lot of infantry units, not getting their innate reflective charge bonuses or conversely just not having a lot of their passive abilities properly trigger, resulting in units that are shadows of what they should be because what makes them unique actually doesn't work for them. A lot of this leads to this massive kind of mosh pits of people humping against each other without even a single drop of MDMA or acid to be found. And this is especially true if you do a lot of the early game fights for Greece's Goldtooth, where it's ogres and ogres. Your friendly ogres collide into one another, interrupting their charge bonuses, and the enemy ogres sort of kind of bounce against yours upon contact, causing this sort of morass of bellies. Also, the default stances for units such as skirmish or guard mode, even when turned off in the options menu, will oftentimes remain on. This will result in your units not following through with specific move or attack orders until you've realized that the game decided to turn that mode back on, or for your unit for whatever reason between your current and last battle. It's fixable by simply pressing Ctrl-A and turning off the respective mode, but this can cost your precious moments for a counter charge or flanking move that would have made a battle much easier. Then the worst bug, the biggest issue of the entire list, I mean the entire video, is the auto-resolve bug. Warhammer has had a rocky history with auto-resolve. Stacking range units would mean you'd win the favor of the RNG auto-resolve gods, and in Warhammer 2, just before the end, it was finally at a sweet spot. Warhammer 3 does not have the same auto-resolve. It is brutal. Tzeentch has by far the best auto-resolve because of all their units being ranged, but it depends on if you're playing as Tzeentch or versus Tzeentch, as auto-resolve is dictated by the difficulty and who is the player. So you might have a superior army fighting against an 8-man Tzeentch garrison, and it'll show as a crushing defeat or Pyrrhic victory, when in most cases it most certainly would not be that way. This results in you having to fight nearly every single battle, and this is a huge amount of tedium added to the game, and what's worse is that a good share of people auto-resolve the majority of battles anyway. If you're not comfortable with fighting large battles, then it results in you not being comfortable playing the game. This, of course, would lead to you not wanting to play the game. It doesn't help that what feels like 80% of those battles are fought in either a major siege or minor settlement battle, adding even more tedium into the mix. We've gone through it all. We've soaked in the glory of Warhammer 3, discussing the high points of the culmination of a trilogy of games in the Warhammer universe. Then we waded through the nasty underbutt of the low points of the game. And I get it, developing during a global pandemic is not a good time. And we've seen this time and time again in the last year, with games coming out being in a pretty rough position. Again, to bookend all this information, Creative Assembly is getting a patch out to us, hopefully within the next week or two, that quells almost all my big complaints on this list. After that, we should hopefully be getting insight to future DLC and the inclusion of the Immortal Empire's combined map. Just the latter of these two is going to make the game absolutely amazing, because we'll be able to play all the previous legendary lords with the updated conventions of Game 3. I can finally craft the fanfic marriage of Imrik, Dragon Prince of Kalador, to Cathayan Waifu Miao Ying, the Storm Dragon, in a glorious alliance. So with everything being said, I think Warhammer 3 is a great game, and I think it will become an amazing game, giving some patches and attention to the community's feedback on mechanics or shortcomings of specific factions. Let me know in comment section below if you agree with some of these points, or maybe you have other things you really don't like that you want to talk about. Or again, maybe there's parts of the game you love that I totally missed. Go ahead, share your opinion. And as I've said before, we all want this game to be amazing in the end. So don't attack each other in sharing your gripes or loves for the game. We're all on the same team. And everything I've said thus far is really my own opinion. So take it with a grain of salt. If you love 100% of the game, then that's fine. If you hate 100% of the game, that's also fine. It's convincing one another that your stance is better than the others is where it gets messy. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.